I'm your host, John Tobacco. I've been walking these streets through the caverns of Wall Street, pounding the pavement for 25 years. This is Federal Hall. The capital of capitalism is right behind me. This is where the politics meets the economy, and we're gonna bring it all to you here on What's the Deal. We're bringing you real experts with real understanding, not talking heads, not guys who manage their mommy and daddy's money.
Hate drives the voters. We saw that against Hillary.
Who created more jobs when they were president?
We'll be the only show on television that every week has one whole segment based on cryptocurrency.
It's the ultimate disintermediary.
It's nonsense to say that people can't vote. We're then on the point, and are you saying we have literacy? What we should have is a voter ID.
Tell me, what's the deal?
What's the deal?
Free donuts for everyone.
Great!
What's the deal? This is Newsmax TV's alternative NFL programming, and we bring you the political views from the left, from the right, and from the center. We bring you the best guests, the best politicos, and the best pundits, and we talk it out right here. At the end of the show, there may be yelling, there may be screaming. We're going to shake hands, and we're going to leave friends. Tonight, on my esteemed panel, we have, on the right, Steve Levy, former New York State Assemblyman, one of the only men in New York State history to be endorsed by all parties in a race. And Curtis Sliwa is in the center tonight, my chairman in the New York State Reform Party. Curtis Sliwa, the founder of the Guardian Angels, protecting the subways and the children and the people in New York City for years. Also a commentator on WABC radio right here in New York City. And next to me on my left, Mark Green. On the left, Mark Green, former New York City public advocate, one of the only men to run against Bill de Blasio, Andrew Cuomo, and Mike Bloomberg. Guys, thank you very much for joining us here this week on What's the Deal. Many are saying the history and the future of our country is on the line. Mark, let's start from the left.
In a midterm election, the party in power, defined by the White House, usually loses seats. Trump, of the last 10 presidents, is the least popular incumbent after 2 years. And so there's it looks like the Democrats could win between 27 and 35 seats. If it's less than that, it's a problem for the Democrats. They'll be I know this. I'm married to one for 41 years. Wow. Unbelievably demoralized if they get under 23, because then the Republicans keep the majority.
41 years of marriage must be unbelievable demoralizing also.
I love you, honey. And in the Senate, because of the quirk of the cycles, there are 3 times more Republican senators, 3 times more Democrats up, forgive me, than Republicans. So it's extremely hard, if not impossible, for the Democrats to win.
Curtis, is it maybe possible that even if he loses the House, now he can start to run an agenda with the left and say, hey, let's do some infrastructure?
Well, there's no doubt, but can you imagine how much money would be bet on these midterm elections? I mean, the passion that is involved. And look at this. Hate drives the voters. We saw that against Hillary. Americans hated Hillary so that even if they didn't like Donald Trump, they voted for Trump in the end, because a lot of the Bernie, the Alta Sanders voters went with Trump and not with Hillary.
A minority.
And the hate now is for Trump. So my prediction, Democrats triumph in the House and the Senate, because their hate is greater now for Trump. In fact, they don't care if there's more money in the pocket. They don't care if the country is doing better. They don't care if the economy is booming. All of that is true. And Donald Trump is his own nemesis, because he almost never talks about it. What's he talk about? The freaking wall, the border, brown people, the horde coming across. Meantime, Americans are going to retire in Mexico. They're buying their pharmaceuticals there, and they're going for medical and dental procedures there. So obviously, we're not too worried about getting raped or robbed and going to Mexico. So Trump, talk about the economy, and you will get reelected. But if you talk about these other issues, it's WWF. It's Vince McMahon Jr. It just riles up the crowd. But it won't deliver for the Republicans.
As Curtis and Mark are speaking, Steve is sitting over there writhing in his chair, ready to talk about it. Weigh in on both Mark and Curtis's observations as well.
Well, John, I have to preface this by noting in 2016, and I was doing color commentary such as we're doing now, When we ended our show at 11 o'clock, I was saying we're going to wake up tomorrow with Hillary Clinton being president, as many of us thought. I even thought she was going to win before the polls even opened that day. But what we saw was that the polls have underestimated the conservative vote. We saw it with Brexit. People give answers often to what they think the pollster wants to hear. In a politically correct world, they're sometimes shy about saying, yeah, I do want to protect our borders. Yeah, I do want this more conservative candidate, and they won't always admit that on exit polls or leading up to the actual election. And we saw that happen in 2016 as well.
I think most of the polling that the mainstream media uses is bull.
Okay, what are you talking about? We have 10
talking about
10 different polls, different methodologies. You add them up, and they were largely accurate, except in Michigan and Wisconsin. Are you fake media?
No, this is
What do you mean?
this is the real news. And I was listening to guys
I
like John
understand.
McLaughlin from McLaughlin Associates who was saying that with a little move in Michigan and Pennsylvania, Trump can win this
Do
thing.
you think-
There was only one pollster, and you never saw him on the left-wing media, McLaughlin, talking about his polls.
You're going backwards. Let me go
Yes,
forward.
no, we
Do
both
you
going
think the
back.
media is the enemy of the people?
I do.
You know, guys like you inflamed the guy in Pittsburgh who said, we're being invaded, I'm going to kill Jews. Guys like you saying, not that you disagree with me, I disagree with you, but I'm the enemy.
I am
of-
disagreeing
no,
with
no,
you,
let
and
me
you're
explain.
already making me a shooter.
No.
Guys like me
You
didn't
didn't
inflame
pull
anything.
the trigger, but you
There's
lit
no
the match.
listen.
He said so.
There's no shows on TV
They
that
said
bring
so.
on a real Democrat, a real Republican, and a real independent. There's no shows on TV like that. So it's not guys like me. Guys like me are trying to put out a conversation where people can talk and not accuse each other. So let's just take one step back.
Fine.
It's not guys like me.
Well,
Okay,
wait a
I'm
second.
not your guy.
You said that the American media, the New York Times, the Washington Post.
I never said those words, but I didn't say New York
Trump
Times.
says it all the time.
I'm not Trump.
If you think they are the enemy of the people, then you're a radical. Is Chris Ruddy the enemy of the people? Of course not, because you agree with him.
No.
I don't think he's the enemy
Right,
of the people.
Newsmax. One of the things that we talk about on this show a lot, and I'm wearing my purple tie because I always talk about the purple people, okay? And people that are all red right down the line and all blue down the line, they're zealots. And most of the people that I know and I love and I respect, they have some reds and some blues, which makes them purple. So I think most of America, the silent majority is the purple people that can hear both sides. You can be pro-gun and pro-choice. You can be that, and you're a purple person. The two parties that we have right now, they only give us red or blue. I think the purple people are the silent majority, and I think places like Newsmax, where we are right now, that are willing to hear the voices of every constituency, are the purple people.
You're saying both sides, red and blue. I don't know a Democratic official or a Democratic voter who thinks the equivalent of Obama was born in Kenya, who thinks 3 to 5 million illegals all voted for Trump. This is
No,
conspiracy.
they think everyone who voted for Trump is a racist and deplorable.
Well,
You know, finally, we're at the point where we can acknowledge the media's prejudice. In South America, they accept that. In Europe, they accept it. Nobody says they're fair and balanced. They said this is left-wing media, this is right-wing media. We're finally at the point in America where we accept that the New York Times has a left-wing bias. Fox News has a right-wing bias.
the equivalent.
The New York Post has.
Do you think the New York Times is as liberal as Fox is conservative?
Oh, yeah.
More so.
Oh, yeah.
More so.
It's reflected in their reporting. If it was just editorial, I would say editorial is separate from the reporting. But when you start reading stories, you can see there's a clear bias, and I don't have a problem with that. I'll read
you ask
both
me-
points of view and come to my own conclusion.
Let me agree. The New York Times is biased for facts.
Hmm.
I know.
They're only biased on facts. Only on stuff.
No. They're biased for facts.
That's the thing we're not supposed to be biased on, Mark.
I know a lot. No. You misunderstood what I said.
Facts are what we're not supposed to be biased on. The facts
Stop
are the facts,
misquoting
you
me.
know?
Around the world, the New York Times is regarded as the greatest paper in the world, if not ever. Fox is regarded as a
among
joke.
liberal elites.
Right.
It's regarded as the
The
greatest
best people wanna
paper
go
in
there.
the world. The government under Barack Obama made the federal interest rate 0. Major banks and institutions, which were the largest donors to Barack Obama, were able to borrow money from the Fed at 0 and then go over to the U.S. Treasury Department and buy 30-year T-bonds and get paid 2%. So the government gave banks money for free and let them buy treasuries and get paid 2%. Why would a bank lend money to John Tobacco or anyone else and take risk when they can borrow from Uncle Sam at 0 and then give that money back to Uncle Sam and get paid?
John, you would have to acknowledge, though, the Democrats accepted that because obviously Barack Obama was turning New York then into his own ATM machine. But I didn't see any Republicans disagreeing with that because they supported the big banks. In fact, banks are too big to fail, right? Business is too big to fail. So we, the schmucks, the putzes, have to bail them out because of their own greed and avarice. Both the Republicans and Democrats supported Wall Street. They did not go at Wall Street.
I don't disagree with you,
Right.
Curtis.
They didn't,
There's
they
no
didn't
doubt
just
about
support
it.
it.
I don't disagree with you.
They
George?
created the problem. But talking about one of the funniest things I've seen in recent memory is President Obama now on the stump saying, "I gave you this recovery." 8 years. It was the worst recovery after a recession since at least World War II. The only president who could not, in one full year, get over the 3% growth level. Because of the overregulation, because of the increase in taxes, they had considered 1.6% growth in his final year being the new normal. When they said manufacturing jobs were down to near nothing, they said it's the new normal. You have a new administration come in, they cut taxes, they cut regulations. Lo and behold,
Steve,
you're now getting
right.
monstrous
Steve, give me 30
GDP. You're
seconds.
getting manufacturing jobs, construction jobs,
I give
wages
you 30
over
seconds.
3%
Can you
for
give
the
me 30
first
seconds?
time in a decade.
But more debt and deficit.
I only need
More debt and
30 seconds.
Go
deficit.
ahead,
Then
Rob.
remember.
Go ahead.
No. The
Yeah,
deficit,
yeah.
let me
No.
correct
The
this.
Republicans with Obama said he's raising the debt, he's raising the deficit, but for Trump, they have window shades on their eyes and a zipper on their mouth.
when
They
Barack-
are fugazis when it comes to that.
The
Steve.
deficit is up because
And
of
the
the
crowd
spending
goes
bill.
wild.
Steve,
The deficit is not up because of the tax
That's a
cuts.
joke.
There's more revenue that's come into the Treasury after the tax cuts than were there before.
Okay, next.
The deficit
Hold
is
on.
up because of the spending
Steve,
bill.
Steve,
You're
$1.3
fantastic,
trillion.
and you're right.
Okay, here's the
The honorable
problem.
gentleman from New York is granted 30 seconds.
When Barack Obama became president, we were in a great recession. America lost $14 trillion. 8 million people lost their homes. After a year,
Not true.
unemployment. You
That's not
don't want to bet me. After a year, unemployment was at 10%. For the next 80 months, Barack Obama's administration, it went from 10% to 4.5%. Steve, who created more jobs when they were president? Donald Trump in his first 21 months, or Barack Obama? You see where I'm headed. In his last 21 months, you two have tried to argue that Barack Obama screwed the economy. He saved the economy. Look at the numbers.
No one tried to argue that.
No,
No one
look,
tried to argue
answer
that.
the question.
He came in
Yeah.
when we were in the depths. There's no doubt about it, which was caused
80
by
straight months
policies
of
on
growth.
both sides. But you look at any recovery, the way it usually goes is you go down, you come in at rock bottom, and you go up. This was the worst projected increase we've ever seen. It came down. The bleeding was stopped because of TARP and other things, and it went up gradually, and they said, that's all we can hope for.
Let's go back.
Then Trump came in,
Let's go back.
lowered taxes,
Right.
and you have a V again,
But
the way it's supposed to be.
Let's
That's
go
what
back to
happened.
Bush 43. Subprime mortgages. What Democrats and Republicans were opposed to subprime mortgages, which was a scam, which was a guarantee that we were going to implode as a country. As long as Republicans and Democrats and their supporters were making money, they were all supporting subprime mortgages. You were giving mortgages out that you knew people couldn't pay back. Both parties are a shanda. They're a disgrazia.
I love when Curtis uses all of his Italian vernacular.
And let's not forget the Yiddish, the shanda.
Disgraziato. We're gonna take a quick break, and we're gonna talk about same-day voter registration, and we're gonna talk about what Donald Trump will do if he loses the House. You're watching What's the Deal? The show that does not kneel. And we'll be back right after this. Hey, welcome back. We just saw the greatest midterm election maybe in our history, where people decided, is Donald Trump's policies where we want our country going, or do we want to have a check and balance on him? And one of the things that's been reported up until now is all this early voting, monster early voting. People are out in advance. They're voting right here where we are at Bobby Van's Steakhouse in New York City. We don't have early voting. Guys, how important is it for reforms in all voting to allow everyone to early vote? Maybe today you're out of town and you just can't get there. Maybe today you got to pick up your kid at basketball practice after work and you get tied up and you can't vote. How important, Mark, you were a public advocate, you stood up for the people of New York City. Why didn't you ever fight for early voting?
I pushed democracy hard. We're going to agree. The reason we vote on the first Tuesday in November is because 100 years ago, farmers collected crops on a certain day. It's completely archaic. And in our children's lifetimes, instead of waiting Atlanta today, they waited 3 hours online.
Wait, we just agreed?
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay, good, that's fine.
It's ridiculous.
It's the first time I've ever agreed with Mark Green in my life, but it's fantastic.
Yeah, well,
I'm a new man.
Well, if you agreed that Obama's last 21 months, there
No,
were
I
more
didn't
jobs.
agree to that, but
You don't like the fact?
early voting was the top.
In our state, as most people know, the governor's a Democrat, the state senate is Republican. They couldn't come together. There should be early voting, voting by mail. Oregon has only voting by mail. Instead of 55% in presidential election years, 75% vote, and it's safe. That's the future.
Curtis, I keep thinking that we have all these national holidays. The New York Stock Exchange is closed for Martin Luther King Day. Why can't some federal officials say, hey, Election Day is a national holiday and everyone's off? Go home, do research on your candidates, talk to your kids about it, bring the kids to the polls. We have like 25 to 30% voting. If there was a national holiday, we'd have so much more of
Great
a
idea.
populace.
Well, I will tell you this, John. As chairman of the New York State Reform Party, we promote initiative and referendum. Let's look at 2 states. We've got California, really blue. We've got Arizona, maybe becoming a little purplish, but normally red. They have initiative and referendum, sometimes 20 ballot measures. Some of them are a little crazy, some of them are very mainstream. The people are passionate about concepts, not politicians. So they'll be debating their town hall meetings, the major surge of voting. We have Ubats here, we have Bupkis here in New York. Occasionally they'll give you an initiative and referendum about some poll up there, you know, in Poughkeepsie, whether they should have it or not. The more initiative and referendum, the more people will get involved because they're passionate about issues. And the best thing is, if you lose 2 years later, if you get enough required signatures, you can come back and do it all over again. We want more debate. And in fact, notice, a lot of our elected officials, Democrats and Republicans, if they're incumbents, they won't debate. There should be mandatory debates.
That's right.
Period.
Steve, you're an elected official on a statewide basis in the past. What's wrong with initiative and referendum? What's wrong with early voting?
You're asking the guy who was the prime sponsor when I was in the New York State Assembly for initiative and referendum. Maybe it's time, it's finally coming, but the powers that be in the state of New York, which by the way have the most Byzantine and archaic election laws in the nation, don't want to give power to the people. It's the same reason they were against the Constitutional Convention, because real everyday people might get in there and overturn all the garbage they've passed through the special interests that control them for all the years. But early voting is a good thing. The liberal Democratic talking point, as encapsulated by the media, is there's this vast conspiracy disenfranchising people to vote. It has never, mark my words, I'm saying it again, never been easier in the United States of America to vote than it is today. You can vote 10 days in advance. You can vote by mail. It's nonsense to say that people can't vote if they don't want to.
You ever heard of literacy tests?
And then Are you saying we have literacy? What we should have is a voter ID, because while you say voter fraud is non-existent, that's not true. I will concede to you that when Donald Trump goes out there and said there were 3 million illegal aliens that voted, that's nonsense, and that hurts the cause.
Why does he say
it? Wasn't accurate, but what is also not accurate is that there's no fraud. If you look at the election, and that's all you need when you have the difference of 20 votes in an election. The United States presidential election in 2000 was decided by 500 votes down in Florida. Al Franken was elected in his first year in Minnesota with 380 contested votes, and he won by about 320 votes. All you need is a small sliver of bogus votes, and it tilts an election.
For
you need
100
ID.
years after the Civil War, African Americans were frustrated in the franchise.
Who's
which is why
disagreeing?
throughout the country, African Americans, like in the literacy test days, are being frustrated because they have to show an ID.
Oh my
and
God!
1 second.
You got to show an
they
ID to
have-
get into a government building. To
No,
get social
1
services, you have to
second,
show
1
an ID.
Voting is a right. Walking into a government building is not. And you are putting your head in the sand, Steve, to deny that people of color have a harder time getting
That's
to
so
vote.
condescending.
Where was
That's
I'm
so
sorry,
racist
I'm
and
sorry.
condescending.
Hang on.
Voting
Hang on.
Rights
Can I
Act
take
affected the South.
Can I take control back of my show for a minute? In what is in the Bill of Rights, or the where is voting a right? It's where is it? Where is it delineated as a right?
14th Amendment.
No, no. Where is it delineated as a right? You don't have a right, because if you had a right and you got arrested, the government wouldn't be allowed to take away one of your inalienable rights.
I know, just a
would they?
simple question about ID. New York has 40% of the people in America who use mass transit. Most Americans do not use mass transit. How do they get to the polls? They have to drive. To drive, you have to have a license. You have to have a registration. You have to have ID. What's the problem with having ID? Yeah. You need ID for everything you do in life, even to go to a library and take out a book. And we're saying, this is prejudicial because you're asking the people who have IDs?
Understand, John, do you know any elderly people of color who are homebound? Obviously.
I do.
Yeah. Ask them for their ID. I have ID. You have ID. When you demand IDs and you know that elderly people of color
don't have their ID anymore.
They don't have their ID anymore. And so if you're going to deny,
so is this? Are you?
You're going to deny.
Wait. Are you making? This almost sounds like reverse racism. You're saying an elderly person of color doesn't have ID, because I know my Aunt Jeannie, God rest her soul, she just died at 95 years old. She still had her wallet with her little ID. She never drove in her life, but she had a little ID in there. And, like, people have ID even though they're old.
John,
so why are you saying a person of color? They don't have ID?
You're in a fantasy land, Phil.
I am.
Yeah, I'll tell you why.
So my Aunt Jeannie didn't have her ID.
I'll tell you why.
95.
In 1965, there was a Voting Rights Act because the black, in a century of habit, wouldn't let minorities vote in the same population as whites.
Understood.
The Voting Rights Act existed until John Roberts knocked out a section making it harder to enforce.
Okay.
If you guys are going to sit here and deny that there isn't voter suppression, I don't know what country you're living in.
That's another Democratic
love
talking
this
point
guy. I love
echoed
this
by
guy.
the media that this
We gotta have him on more.
that this latest decision by the Supreme Court disenfranchised people and overturned the 1965 Voting Rights Act. It did not. Nobody really knows what that was all about. Let me tell you what it was about in 2 seconds. We're now 50 years down the road, so all the court said is if the locals want to enact election law, they no longer have to go through the feds as a clearinghouse.
Got
They
it.
enact their law. If it's unconstitutional, you can still
Curtis.
sue on it, but you guys make it sound like, oh, it's the poll tax, it's the literacy tax. It's nonsense.
Curtis, is it really that scary to the general American to show their ID to vote?
No, it's not scary, but it is to vote because we don't promote civics in classes. When I went to school, I'm 64 now. 1 day a week was devoted to civics. We understood what the elected officials were, what job performances they had to do, the importance of voting. You don't have that in schools. You have children who are very bright in math and science, and they can compete internationally. But when it comes to history, and especially civics, it's almost non-existent. And that is our responsibility, because we should mandate that in the school system, not just public, but private, charter, religious schools. You must take civics lessons. Now, if you don't want to vote, that's your choice. But at least you understand what government is about.
You know, there's a proposal, automatic voter registration. So instead of assuming people will find their way, register, and obviously it's more of a burden on old people, et cetera, you're automatically registered at 18, and then your job is, if you move, you let the government know. It's automatic.
Despite the fact that
Are
it
you
hurts,
for that? Are you for that?
despite the fact that it hurts Republicans, I am for it.
Okay.
I support it, yeah.
I'm for it also. I have no problem with it.
I'm going to end this segment with a perfect parallel, okay? Cameraman Rob, he's standing right there. We were talking about some Republican and conservative views earlier, and he said, I can't get in this conversation. Rob's a millennial, okay? And he said, I can't get in this conversation. I'm not with you guys. I'm with the other party, okay? And I said, Rob's probably not even registered to vote. He's talking about he's with the other party. And he said, no, I'm not registered to vote. So while there is enthusiasm behind people like Bernie Sanders and others, you're right. These younger people, they don't know enough because they haven't been taught civics or
We
they haven't
haven't
been
taught them.
forced. But I don't like forcing people to register to vote because I feel like that's kind of a socialist thing. But you heard from the best of them. Newsmax just lets me sit here and ask the questions. Their commentary is a lot better than mine. We got to take a quick break. We're coming back right after this. You better watch the commercials because without the commercials, this show is not going to be on, so stay tuned. You're watching What's the Deal on Newsmax TV, the show that doesn't kneel. We stand for the anthem. We salute our troops. Mark, earlier tonight, you said you thought it would be a split. What happened? Why?
Right now, 40% of the country likes Donald Trump. 53% in Gallup don't like him. A majority of people voted for Democrats for the House, but Republicans are in control because of gerrymandering. A majority of people in contested Senate races voted for Democrats. But because Wyoming gets 2 senators and California gets 2 senators, it's not reflected. Obviously, a majority voted for Hillary Clinton, but Donald Trump is president. So there's a natural Democratic majority in America, according to polls, that Trump's racial taunts, that black people are low IQ, LeBron James, low IQ.
You didn't say black people.
He said LeBron James.
That's not
Maxine,
all black.
Hold up, Maxine Waters, Stacey Abrams in Georgia. Black people are hearing this.
Donald Trump said Stacey Abrams had a low IQ. I didn't hear him say that.
No, he said now, he said a woman who went to Yale Law School
He
and
didn't
is
say
a
that.
minority.
He said she's unqualified.
She's unqualified.
Right.
Black people understand that he's not on their side, and he's conveying this. This is why David Duke 3 days ago applauded Donald Trump after he spoke. Not that all Republicans are racist. That's ridiculous. But most racists are Republicans, and that's why David Duke lauded him.
Here's the great thing about these progressive Democrats. You ask them, you wake up tomorrow morning, and it's a split House and Senate. Why? He's talking to me about Donald Trump being a racist. Is that why it's a split? Because Donald Trump is a racist? The question was, the House is Democratic, the Senate is Republican. Why do you think that happened?
Because the public now, instead of just listening to a new candidate, Donald Trump, predict great things, as all first-time candidates would, they've seen him. The natural majority will vote in the House, and there's a natural progressive majority, and the polls show it.
Fantastic. Mark Green did give us a straight answer, which is fantastic. Curtis, why?
Hate, because they hate Trump with a passion, meaning Democrats. Whereas Trumpers, they love Trump. Love never drives out a vote the way hate does. That's why so many people voted against Hillary. They hated her. So they voted for Trump. But they hate Trump now, the Democrats, and they're passionate. Now there's going to be a move to impeach him. Well, Clinton got impeached. Didn't hurt him. You know, he's still able to function as the president. But what it's going to do is it's going to drive the Democrats further to the left. You can't expect Schumer, or if Pelosi emerges and doesn't get challenged, to be able to rein in the Democrats. What they're going to have to find is another Bill Clinton, a centrist Democrat who served in the military, male or female, who comes from the heartland, who can challenge Trump the next time. Then they've got a real possibility of beating him. But if they're going to go with Corey, Spartacus Booker, or any of these left-wingers who are now trying to be socialist Democrats, they're going to lose. Because the majority of the country does not want to move in that direction.
So we got a split House and Senate. How come? Why did it happen?
Before the first candidate ever declared for these midterm elections, the smart money was to go with a flip of the House, because that's the way it almost always happens. In fact, since Lyndon Johnson, there were only 2 instances in midterm elections where the party in power actually gained seats in the House. One of them was 2002 with George Bush, and the aftermath of the 9/11 instance, and you wanted stability. The other was 98 with Clinton. 2 things going on then: a white-hot economy, as you have right now, and an impeachment proceeding where the Republicans, it was thought by many, overreached and there was a backlash. Notice this year how the Democratic operatives and pollsters are not talking about impeachment. They looked at their internal polls and they saw the driving force in persuadable voting is on health care. And they bammed it home day after day. And I have to say, the Republicans did a pretty dismal job reacting to it. And they could have very easily said, your rates are going through the roof because of the Democrats who put this in.
I agree with every word you just said.
But
When you say white-hot economy, are you concerned about being perceived as a racist?
good.
Anytime you
Good
say
with it.
white these days,
By the way,
you got a problem
you know
on your
how
hands.
you know how you define a racist. You know who a racist is, right? It's anyone who's beaten a Democratic liberal in an argument.
Wow. Well,
Think about that.
You know what?
If he couldn't have been on the merits, you must be a racist.
There are no racists. You're right.
There are, but don't overuse the term, because then you dilute when someone is really a racist and engaging in racist acts.
Guys, thank you very much. Mark Green, Curtis Sliwa, and
Steve Levy.
Steve Levy. Steve is like coming in at the end with all the bombs, you know? And thank you, guys. You watch these shows on TV, on MSNBC and CNN and Fox News, and there's all this noise, and they bring in, one token lackey from the other side who's paid to just sit there and take a beating. We don't do that on this show. We bring in real people who have been in the trenches, who know where the rubber meets the road. They have real points of view. They put real policies in place. They've made laws. They've made legislation. They've run. They've shook the hands. They've kissed the babies. And this is what a real dialogue is about. You're watching What's the Deal? The show that doesn't kneel. We'll be back right after this with the new economy, cryptocurrency, and everything you want to know. If you're a crypto dummy like me, we're going to break it down plain and simple for you at home. We're coming back right after this. My friend Kevin O'Hara joins us today on What's the Deal. Kev, thanks for joining us.
Absolutely.
Kevin was the general counsel of Archipelago, which was a group of small execution companies and independent exchanges that formed together and changed the capital markets as we know them. They were acquired by the New York Stock Exchange. Kev, you were also the general counsel of the New York Stock Exchange. And more importantly, you were a great friend of mine who outdresses me.
Oh, we're going there already.
And just as importantly for today's segment, you were in the Enforcement Division of the Securities and Exchange Commission as a prosecutor. So you've seen over the years the fraud. You've been on the government side. You've also been in the private sector, successful investor. We talk every week on this show about cryptocurrencies, about blockchain, and how it's starting to transform things. Your experience on all sides of the market, where do you come down on cryptocurrency?
Well, first let me say, John, congratulations on your show. I'm really proud of you, and
Thank you.
And thank you for inviting me. In terms of blockchain, cryptocurrency, this old man here has actually come to a place where I think it is highly revolutionary. And how I sort of bring it down to the ground floor is people have Facebook, and Zuckerberg convinces you to give him your data essentially for free. There's a small charge to him because he builds the platform, and then he sells all your data. The return on that is essentially it goes essentially to him. In a blockchain world or a distributed ledger world, essentially you would be selling all your data yourself, or nearly all of it. So you would capture 95% of those returns. I mean, that's the power really and you can apply that across industries so that end users, producers, and consumers ultimately can transact for themselves. Another way of looking at it in the financial services end of the world is if one wanted to get a mortgage. Well, typically you have to go down to a bank, or now you have sort of shadow banking organizations and the like, and you may source directly your mortgage money in South Africa or Russia or China or Brazil, and that's the power of it. It's the ultimate disintermediary.
I believe the regulators in the U.S. have told people point blank that exchanges trading cryptocurrency like Coinbase are illegal. They're not exchanges. They're being represented as exchanges, but they do not afford the investors federal securities law protection. Mm-hmm. Where do you come down from an enforcement side? Is Coinbase an exchange, or is it a peer-to-peer?
I think the chairman of the SEC walked in, this was Jay Clayton. He walked in and he was approved, and this large issue just landed on his table, and that was there was an incredible amount of not capital raises, but there was a lot of raises around ICOs, et cetera, a lot of trading, a lot of buzz, a lot of speculation, a lot of volatility, and it landed on his desk. And since then, they've ticked off a number of enforcement cases, and each one teaches the marketplace something new.
But why aren't they going after the biggest one?
Well, I think they're
operating, in my view, and I could be wrong, that's why I bring on experts like you to educate me and our audience, but why aren't they going after the biggest if they're out there marketing themselves as an exchange, and investors think, oh, that's like the New York Stock Exchange, and it has no federal securities protection?
Yeah. So if you are going to apply the current regulatory scheme, which is there, and that's what they have been doing, is again, I talk about this in my article, expect more cases. I think this is the first of many against unregistered exchanges that are trading unregistered tokens.
This is the one instance in my life that I could think about where I want more regulation, because that'll create adoption. If there are better rules, then the people that abide by them will give you federal securities protection. And then investors, and especially institutional investors like big Chicago guys like you, they'll invest more money in this stuff.
Right. And I think the marketplace is finding its way there. So the SEC's come out and said, essentially to date, they may change this, but essentially they haven't seen an ICO yet.
That's legal.
That's not a security. So we're dealing in a world of a lot of unregistered securities. I think ultimately this, I'll call this industry, is so revolutionary and so different that they are going to create at some point, for regulatory certainty, its own regulatory scheme.
So basically, the two things I want to say to our audience is, if you think right now you're trading on an exchange, you aren't, not in the US. And if one of your friends or your neighbors or one of your buddies at the country club or one of your girlfriends at the coffee shop tell you about this great new ICO, the first question you should ask them is this a security? If it isn't, throw it in the garbage. You're watching What's the Deal? It's alternative NFL programming, the show that doesn't kneel. We'll be back right after this with more from Kevin O'Hara. Welcome back. You're watching What's the Deal? Kevin O'Hara joins us again. Kev, you mentioned earlier that there's been some changes in Washington, and I want to talk to you a little about the midterm elections. Before we get to that, tell us a little bit about your most recent investments and opportunities that you're pursuing in the crypto space.
Sure. When I invest in businesses. I have something to bring, so I'm not a passive investor. I tend to invest in companies where I can literally go in as a senior advisor and help young management teams build the company. But most recently, I made an investment in Rengen Labs, which is a private equity fundraising platform which also does security tokenization. And it does it in a I would never invest in anything unless it was highly, from a legal standpoint, we were regulated in the proper manners and the like. And
if the guys with the badges are investing in things, that's usually a good thing.
The badge has been put down.
But still, you're already, once a lawman, always a lawman.
Yeah, that's
You're
true.
not gonna invest. Let's do what we usually do on What's the Deal. Say it straight. You wouldn't invest in some bull.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
That's a fact.
I'm also involved in a company in Chicago called Harmonic, and Harmonic is building a lot of middleware and backware for crypto trading, and it brings, as you know, because the crypto world essentially is built, it looks and feels from a market structure standpoint like the cash equities markets, that there's a lot of competitive marketplaces,
Of
not
course.
exchanges,
Right.
and the whole idea of connecting them and creating a virtual central limit order book has some feel, and this is something that Harmonic's doing.
So
as well.
both of these investments that you're joining in some strategic capacity, they rely on really the nuts and bolts of what your career has been. It's regulation and transforming, a bunch of interconnected networks into one, like you did at ARCA, and then it was acquired the New York Stock Exchange, and we trade today like we do because of you and your company. You're also a great market man, and before you go, I got to just get a couple of minutes from you on, now that the midterm elections are over, okay, we know the Democrats have control of the House. It's probably a good thing. Trump's already thrown the ball in their court and said, hey, I'll do some deals with you, come on down. How does this affect the market? People are talking, well, it's down 500 yesterday, et cetera. What do you think this does to the markets over the long term?
Well, I'm going to take your question, I'm going to apply it a little bit back to crypto, et cetera, is you now have a new chair of the Financial Services Committee in the House, and that, and so ultimately, how our administrative state works is that on the executive side of the executive branch, you have all the alphabet agencies, the CFTC and the SEC. Ultimately, though, they're accountable up to Congress for budgets and oversight. And it will be very interesting to see, from the crypto and the blockchain side of the world, what those effects are. On the Senate side, you're going to have some consistency. And right now, I think it's not a bill drafting on Capitol Hill, but it's more oversight, and that could have an effect, because it's my sense that, again, the SEC is going to continue forward with its enforcement teachings and enforcement regime as we tick along the way here. But in the back of my mind, I just think at some point, and it could be a year or 2 or 3 or 5 out there, is they're going to want to create, for regulatory certainty, they're going to want to create its own. I think
government
it's that
body.
No, it's its own regulations run. I mean, the SEC may still have a piece.
And you
of
think
it.
somehow or another, Maxine Waters is going to be that insightful person that's going to create a set of regulations around.
Well, she wouldn't be doing
cryptocurrency?
regulations. Regulations would be done on the agency level. But if there were statutes to be worked on, I think probably the SEC, under the current statutes, they're broad. The Supreme Court gives them relatively broad authority. Is that they probably do it at the agency level, but there's a lot of discussion on the Hill too. The Hill's going to have an effect on those discussions.
These government guys who are also lawyers, they always know how to sprinkle in as many times as possible. It's going to take time. You got to put some broad time. It's going to take time. We're going to get to
a little bit of this, a little bit of that.
There's got
a little pinch of this, a little teaspoon of that.
Representations and warranties. Reps and warranties. Take some time. Well, Kev, thank you for coming up here and giving us some time.
Well, again, I want to thank you and congratulations on your show. This is awesome, and thank you for having me.
Can you give us a what's the deal?
What's the deal?
Perfect.